And in my opinion, it will be advantageous for the global affairs, the economy included. If this is conducive to the global economy, then it will be of benefit to the member country, to the countries who are not members of this grouping, which is self-explanatory. Global leaders in economy will derive benefits eventually, although some of them face issues nowadays, like the Eurozone is currently balancing on recession. If the economies of the member countries are stable, if they have good relations with BRICS countries, it will benefit them. As for the United States, this year they're going to see an impressive growth over 3%. 5.7% was after the pandemic. It was the growth of the United States. Later it was 2.5%. This year, 3.2% is expected. But there still have a lot of issues to tackle. Over $700 billion, $718 billion is the trade deficit. Budget deficit, $1.8 billion. Oh, trillion, 1.8 trillion US. And public debt, $34.8 trillion US. These major economies face major issues too, but normal relations with BRICS countries, we are open to pursue them. In my opinion, they'll be beneficial and very much enable to the global economy in general. Mr. President, one clarification. You have said that BRICS countries work on secure exchange of financial information. Does it mean a step towards a single payment system? No. It is about the exchange of financial information, financial messaging system involving central banks. Is it a SWIFT analog? Yes, it is identical to SWIFT. This will ensure international payments. It will ensure international trade. CNN Brazil is the next to have the floor. Daniel Rittner, editorial director, one of the most respectable Brazil journalists based on the Brazilian rating of media companies.
Thank you very much for such an opportunity. Firstly, I have to say that I have bad remembrances somehow of Kazan, because I came in 2018 for the World Cup for leisure, and I was so optimistic and confident with Neymar and the national team. We got eliminated, as you know, and I spent the whole night crying. So I'm speaking of Kazan because you were preparing so carefully the summit of the BRICS. And we in Brazil are also preparing very carefully another summit, which is the G20 in November. Brazil's government invited you to come to the G20, to the Leader Summit. However, the country's judicial power is completely independent, and many legal experts say it would be necessary to comply with the arrest warrant issued by International Court of Justice against yourself. In that regard, let me ask you three simple questions. Are you planning to go to the G20 in Rio in November? Secondly, in face of that, do you think that this situation that I described somehow shows the weakness of the BRICS before old organizations like the ICC? And thirdly, with all due respect, do you fear to get arrested in Brazil?
Firstly, the International Criminal Court is of no universal importance. It is one of international entities whose jurisdiction is not recognized by Russia, as is the case with many other countries of the world. I think the United States does not recognize it either, nor does China, Turkey. So the fact that such an entity exists, in essence, an independent entity like this exists, maybe it's not such a bad thing, but that it is universal, firstly. Secondly, such decisions can be circumvented easily, very easily. Suffice to sign an intergovernmental agreement, and the jurisdiction of the ICC will be restricted to it. We have very good relations with Brazil, stable. They have been lasting for decades. So, by and large, we can sign an intergovernmental agreement and nobody will find themselves in a difficult situation. Now, as for the independence, I don't want to really make it look somber, but the International Criminal Court announced that they're going to take decisions with regard to certain political leaders of the Middle East. Later, the United States checked them, and they shut up. That's about it. The respect for an entity which is not universal, which is not independent, is quite low. It has a low profile, if I may. And the main part, we have a difficult situation. The Ukrainian crisis is far from being over. And, well, the main point, we realize G20 is a good forum. It is useful in general. If it is not politicized, if it is not overly politicized, there have been taken attempts, but it was initiated and not such a long time ago as a purely economic platform. If it goes down this path, it will be useful. But we realize what happens around Russia. I have good understanding. We have good friendly relations with President Lula. Will I go there on purpose to violate the operation of this forum, to ruin it? Even if we let aside the ICC, it will be the only topic for discussions. In fact, we will derail the G20 summit. Why would we do so? We are adults. We will find a person in Russia who will be able to represent the Russian interests in Brazil. Thank you. We are very careful about G20. Mr. President, we are careful about everyone, except for our enemies. Mr. President, you have mentioned the Ukrainian crisis. Just yesterday, while speaking at the European Union summit in Brussels, the expired President Zelensky said the only alternative to the Ukrainian accession to NATO would be to gain nuclear weapons. At the same time, the Bild edition published an interview with some anonymous Ukrainian technician who said Ukraine would need a couple of weeks only to build its own nuclear weapon, and then to deal a strike on the Russian forces. What does it all mean? It's just another piece of provocation. To create a nuclear weapon in the modern world is not a difficult endeavor. I don't know if Ukraine is capable of it. It's not such an easy task, I mean, for the modern Ukraine. But in general, this is a doable thing, because we know the scheme. It is a dangerous provocation, because any step in this direction will face feedback. This is the second. And the third is that, and the main one, is that the political leadership of today's Ukraine has on multiple occasions, and even before the hot phase of the crisis, even prior to this, they made statements. Well, they were mild in their statements, but still they aired a view that Ukraine should have a nuclear weapon. These threats will entail relevant response with the Russian Federation. I will say it outright. Russia will not allow this to happen no matter what. Will it be or may it be that Ukraine has the nuclear weapon from the UK, for instance, like they wanted to have it, now they have it. There cannot be a conditional mood here. Let's not make guesswork, pointing fingers at the UK or any other country. It takes an effort to conceal this. I mean, there is radiation exposure and relevant maneuvers are required. You cannot conceal this like you cannot conceal a needle in this haystack. We can trace any movement in this direction. Saudi Arabia, please. Thank you, Mr. President. I want to correct a mistake of the interpreter. It is our bilateral decision. Mr. Nadim began the discussion. I would like to continue this discussion regarding the Ukraine crisis. You thank Saudi Arabia for its stance, for its assistance in exchanging POWs with Ukraine. It is common understanding that there is strong friendship between Moscow and Riyadh. There is also friendship between Riyadh and Kiev, and Crown Prince in his Fox News interview said Saudi Arabia spares no effort in providing helping hand in addressing the crisis. Your take on the efforts of Saudi Arabia? Many BRICS members proposed ideas. You said Riyadh is close both to Russia and to Ukraine. Can Russia take part in a peace conference if it is hosted by a friendly country like Saudi Arabia until the end of this year? You said about friendly relations between Russia and Saudi Arabia. It is exactly what it is. We consider Saudi Arabia as a friendly state. We have good relations with both the king and friendly personal relations with Crown Prince. I know, and I'm sure that whatever Saudi Arabia does on this track, it does sincerely. No doubt here. So if such measures are organized in Saudi Arabia, the place, the venue is acceptable, would be acceptable to us. But that's not the point. The point is, what shall we discuss? As you are aware, in Turkey, in Istanbul, we have been negotiating for a while, whose outcome was a document initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He put his signature. The document is available. It is a draft treaty, and the excerpt is initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. If Ukraine put their signature there, then they were satisfied on fundamental issues. We could have continued discussing details, but to thrash it completely, rather trash it completely, would be a wrong thing to do. Otherwise, you could do the same with any document. We I can ready to continue a dialogue to attain peace, but building on the document that was prepared for detailed discussions for many months and what was initiated by the Ukrainian side, we are ready to continue building on this.
Есть инициатива.
And there is an initiative of China and Brazil. These countries have a well thought over attitude to that, and a group has been established in New York, and we treat that with attention and respect, and we know that all our friends, including the BRICS members, are set to conclude the conflict ASAP and by peaceful means. We are aware that definitely this is an irritant for the global affairs and for the European affairs and for the global economy. Like no other, Russia is interested to conclude it as soon as possible by peaceful means. We would be ready to come back. It was not us who stopped the negotiations. It was the Ukrainian side that said that we would not, they said, pursue more talks with Russia. And second, a decree by the Ukrainian president came out prohibiting talks with Russia, and it's still in place. Let him, in the first place, repeal that. And everybody calls on us to pursue talks, but the Ukrainian side banned negotiations with Russia. It's ridiculous. But the main point is the underpinnings, and the underpinnings would be that draft document that was agreed upon during this Istanbul negotiations process. And we have a queue from those wishing to ask a question: Emirates, then South Africa, and then Brazil. First, the UAE. Mr. President, your deep understanding and knowledge of military strategies is well known, and probably with respect to the conduct of the Russian army in that war that has lasted much longer than you expected, has to some extent surprised or frustrated you by how the Russian military pursue their goals. And the second question is, how can you decide that you have reached a victory in Ukraine? Well, you know, setting the timelines would be very difficult and counterproductive. Just now we have talked the possibility of peaceful talks, well, and I have said that we would be in favor given the certain conditions, and it's our most sincere and frank position. The sooner the better. And with respect to the military, to the army, today warfare has been rapidly changing, and means and ways of warfare because of the technological progress at the contemporary age and period of time. And it's very hard to assess what is going to happen today and tomorrow. Not long ago, it was said that the contemporary warfare was about the logical solutions, and today I have heard from the people on the ground that of the battlefield that today's war is a war of mathematicians, because radio jamming and interference devices would be effective against certain delivery vehicles, and they would suppress them, and the other side has, for example, calculated and reckoned what is the counterforce and reprograms the software of its striking assets in a week or 3 weeks. The other side once again builds up their efforts and once again changes the jamming program and software, and it can go on forever. Well, the Ukrainian army on its own cannot do that, as neither can they, nor can they use long-range and high-precision delivery vehicles, because they don't have them at hand. It is all done by NATO professionals. But you know what the difference is? NATO is waging a war against us with the hands of the Ukrainian soldiers, and Ukraine spares no lives in the interests of third countries, but Ukraine on its own doesn't use high-tech weapons. NATO does that, and the Russian army wages a war on its own and creates military solutions on its own, and software also is done on its own. It's proprietary, and this is the big difference between us. Over the recent years, I have been witnessing that the Russian army has become one of the most combat effective and high-tech armies in the world. And when NATO will get tired of waging this war against us, I'll just ask them. We were ready to continue fighting, to continue the struggle, and we will have the upper hand. We'll win, we'll prevail. We will prevail. Please, South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. When I listen to some of the questions and some of the comments, I'm in a way very happy I stay in Cape Town on the southernmost tip of the African continent, far away from many of these conflicts. But I also reflect on whether or not the world needs a Mandela moment, and whether BRICS and your leadership can provide that Mandela moment, because you know, every war has to be followed by peace. That is a sine qua non of the world through the ages. And we have to always find the path to peace. Often the path to peace is not very easy, because it's not very obvious. It's also made a lot more difficult by the technological involvement in war today, in conflicts today, because in a way it dissociates people from the war, in a way, so to speak. But Mr. President, my question is a contradictory one, because on the one hand, I think you are a peace lover and you want peace. The Russian people want peace. The people in the Middle East want peace. The people in other parts of the world want peace. But just before we came into this meeting today, the Turkish foreign minister was meeting with a number of his counterparts, I think principally in the Middle East. And he made quite a serious statement. Turkish foreign minister said that there is an extremely high probability of a war between Israel and Iran. You may have or may not have seen that statement by the Turkish foreign minister. Of course, that would be devastating for the region and devastating for the world. My question is, what are your thoughts on this, Mr. President? Can you intervene, and what will you do as Russia? And what will BRICS do if this is to happen? Thank you.
This is a very dangerous and difficult situation you talked about. I have just responded to your colleague with respect to what has been happening on the Ukrainian track, and I has said that NATO wages a war with us, with the hands of the Ukrainian soldiers who use NATO military equipment, and we do both things on our own, and the difference is huge. NATO would not spare Ukraine, would fight till last Ukrainian standing. They cater to the American interests. But we should be thinking, and we are thinking about our own military, our own servicemen, and our own equipment. And when we spare a thought for our people, we think about how to provide peace, and peace by peaceful means, inter alia. This is the difference. So this makes the difference, which is colossal. We do not issue decrees or acts that we ban negotiations. We say we are ready. With respect to the Iran and Israel, well, it's very acute also. If it ends up in a war, both soldiers will participate. We are in touch with Israel and Iran. We have confidential relations with both of these, and we would really want this infinite, as it may turn out, exchange of strikes be stopped at a certain point of time, and such ways to resolve the situation should be found that can be satisfactory for both parties. But this is always the domain of a trade-off. Can they reach a compromise? I think yes. No matter how hard it may seem, I think it is a possibility to entertain. Well, it is a very intricate topic, so just jumping ahead and making some public statements would be counterproductive currently, as it may damage the process. But anyway, the search for ways out is quite relevant. And if the warring parties are interested, we would be prepared to participate with all our sincerity, making allowances for both parties' interests. And as regards Iran, we have an allied relationship with Iran, and we can feel the subtleties of what has been going on there in Iran, and we know what has been happening in different spheres. And just listen. How shall I comment on what happened in Iran? I mean, the strikes from Israel, can one comment upon that? And on the other hand, we keep talking, and I emphasize that we are against any terrorist manifestations, including versus Israel and Israeli people. But still, I think, yes, a compromise is possible. And if it's relevant, we can be in touch with both of the parties to broker and do our best to help find a trade-off. In Brazil,
please get back to the 6-point peace plan proposed by China and Brazil. Would you consider to sit at the table and start negotiations on the terms proposed by China and Brazil? Besides, Mr. President, President Zelensky of Ukraine called the plan destructive and said President Lula of Brazil could be considered too much pro-Russia. That's his words. Would you consider Mr. Lula da Silva an ally? Do you think he can play a role in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine?
You know, the blueprint by China and Brazil and the relevant UN group and the plan, we did not know a thing about that. Neither Brazil nor China, those are very close countries to us, searching for a way out, a peaceful way out. They did not consult with us. They acted upon their own as they considered appropriate. Whether it's good or bad, it's another question, but it is a testimony of the fact that Brazil and China have been acting on their own, not playing into anyone's hands, including into Russia's hands. And I say that publicly and overtly. You can quote me on media. And our foreign minister reported to me from New York without any prior consultations with the Brazilians or the Chinese. It was like breaking news. And I believe these are well balanced, well thought over proposals in general, aiming at a peaceful solution. If someone does not like that, it is their position. And I have said that the Ukrainian side does not consider possible to entertain talks with us. They just set forth requirements and that's it. They were in talks with us. They stopped those talks after we preliminarily reached the agreements in Istanbul. Now they are reluctant. And recently the head of the Kiev regime, during his stay in New York State, stated publicly, "We will not pursue negotiations with Russia," he said. So, what on earth is happening? Whether Kiev likes the Brazilian and the Chinese proposal or not, it's up to them. We have got to know this proposal after it was publicly unveiled. I think it is a good foundation to make attempts to find a peaceful solution. India.
Mr. President, my question is a kind of mix of some of the earlier questions. It relates to the Ukraine conflict. Some time back, you had suggested that that India, China, and Brazil could be potential mediators to bring an end to the conflict. Our Prime Minister Narendra Modi freely communicates with you, also with the Ukrainian president, also with the US. Do you feel that a potential mediation could exist in the near future?
Just now your colleague has asked the question about the Iran and Israel track, and I said that if our mediation is wanted, we will gladly work with the colleagues. Same refers to our friends. In particular, I mean the Prime Minister Modi. While talking with His Excellency over the phone, each time he raises this matter and expresses his considerations, and we are grateful to him for that. Well, we start to round off, and the Emirates, please. Mr. President. I would also like to follow up on the Brazilian question. Mohammed Ben Said is coming to Russia shortly, and this is an important visit, and you had a good visit to Abu Dhabi before. And we talked the ICC and its activities. But what is of importance is that Mohammed bin Said went to the United States and discussed the technological cooperation with the USA. How are you looking at the UAE, that it's capable of building relationships with Iran, US, Russia, and cooperate with the ICC at the same time? Is it an instance of a policy that you would like to pursue? This is a very good example, and we have good standing relations with with the President, and I hope that, I'm sure that his visit will be very fruitful, both the unofficial part. I will invite him to my place next door. We will dine and spend an evening together talking all the relevant matters. And indeed, the President of the UAE can and is able to support good relations with many partners, and this has its own intrinsic value. So we will wait and see. And the Saudi Arabia did a lot helping with respect to the exchange of detainees, and we are in touch with the UAE on similar matters, and the economic ties have been developing, the trade has been growing. It's not as high as the one we have with China, which is 240 billion, but the trend is positive. And our investment fund is a success. These are specific matters of bilateral relations, but with respect to the Middle Eastern issues, we will be listening to the opinions of the UAE and their leadership, and we take that into consideration in our day-to-day policies. China, please. You have just mentioned a lot of matters related to security, and I'm grateful to Your Excellency for the high profile that China has in Russia, and I mean the bilateral relations. And the Chinese MFA stated that President Xi is going to visit the Kazan summit. Under your leadership and the leadership of Xi Jinping, the bilateral ties are going through their best period. What is your vision for the future, mid-term and long-term future? The Russia-China relations are now very promising, no matter whether we mention the productive capability of China, our digital trade and commerce tools, and new dimensions. What are the main areas that bear a lot of promise in the